Those who wait upon the Lord obtain something. They obtain a marvelous addition to the resources. They obtain wings. The wings are to empower us to rise above whatever we have to rise above. And Cary's going to come, Cary Jarrod here, and share. But I know that he has a story to tell us. We remember Cary Jarrod very, very well. And I remember that Cary telling us that Cary knew that one day he'd come to Jerusalem. And he'll probably tell us that story. It may be a difficult thing for him, so we want to support him in that, because anyone who's lost a mate, I cannot imagine it. But I remember going to a cemetery in Funks Grove, Illinois once when we were home, and there was something on the tombstone that said, a little while we walk together, but then there comes a point where one of us will walk alone until God's day. And so Cary has been through this, and maybe he can share a little bit of how he rose above some things, how he took on wings as eagles, and those wings carried him here to Jerusalem to be with us at this time in his life. Cary, please come.
Thank you. It's applause now, but after my testimony, it'll be rotten eggs and tomatoes. Okay, old men have long testimonies, so we will have an intermission. It should happen about 1974, 1975. Yeah, there'll be some snacks, so we'll do that too. Just to be different, I'm going to start at the ending, and then I might go backwards. The ending is I'm standing here in Jerusalem right now. I'm glad to be here, but it is I stand before you a total sinner, lost in my sins, hopelessly lost. There's nothing I can do to overcome that. I deserve to be cast in outer darkness. I deserve hell, the fiery gates of hell. And so it's like you just think there is absolutely nothing I can do, but the God of Israel, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, he loved me so much that long before I was born, he created a way for me to come that I might be with him in eternity. The Lord Jesus came to this life. He came to the earth. He went to the cross for my sins. He was crucified for my sins. He died for my sins. I owe him everything. And so I'm standing here today just to say that. But the love that he had for me, he also had for every one of you. And what a magnificent love that is. How can we imagine that he would love us that much to come and do that? Because we just can't put our arms around it. We can't grasp it. We can't imagine this endless love, this boundless love that he did. All grace, all mercy. There's nothing I can do. Am I not talking loud enough? Get it out of the way, huh? Okay. Well, all right. I'm with you. So that's the ending. So we're standing here. Now let's go all the way back to the beginning. So long, long ago and far away. Once upon a time. I was born in Tulsa, Oklahoma. September 23rd, 1949. So that was a long time ago. My mother and father, are Bill and Betty, were the boy and girl next door, and so I grew up most of my life with my grandparents just a couple of miles away. And if you went to see one of them, you had to go see the other one, and which was okay. And I knew my grandparents loved me, because they took me fishing, they took me to baseball games, they bought me chocolate malts, they did all that. But sadly, from a spiritual speaking point of view, on my mother's side, I never saw anything at all. I never saw them go to church. I never saw a Bible. I never heard them mention the Lord Jesus. They may have known him totally, but I never saw it. There was nothing outward about it. On my dad's side, my grandmother there was a follower of Mary Baker Eddy, Church of Christ Scientists, a horrible cult in the early 1900s where they don't believe in doctors, and they don't believe in everything happens is good no matter what. The main thing is they think the Lord Jesus is just a prophet. They don't see the divine nature in him, and so how sad. So I don't mean that and I say that not to be cruel or anything. It's just to say there's not really a strong history there, from my grandparents' side. When I was 4 or 5 years old, and I've got an older sister, Heather. Heather lives in Colorado Springs. We were always close growing up. Heather, she was a good tomboy. She'd play sports and stuff, and didn't make me play with dolls. So, so it was, we got along good, and we still get along good. So, but anyway, when I was about 4 or 5, my parents moved to house that they bought, something you do in the 50s, and so I walked to school all my life. And so the elementary school was that way, and junior high was that way, and high school was that way. But sadly, that's how we approached our spiritual life. We just walked to the nearest church, and it was right across from the junior high school. But it did have Christian on the outside. 41st Street Christian Church was the name of it. But it was a traditional one where, stand up, you sing a song, you sit down, you read a verse, you stand up, sing a song, 15-minute sermon, and you're out of there. And it just didn't have any depth to me. I didn't see any. I didn't seem like I learned anything. That's a shame. But when I was about 6 or 7 years old, I remember seeing my dad get baptized. So having been raised in that other, he hadn't ever done that. So he went down and he made that commitment. So when I'm 12 years old, I do the same thing. I walked down, made the commitment to the Lord Jesus, was baptized. Sadly, I have to say that I probably did that more because I thought it was expected of me more than what I really understood what I would be doing, because I didn't have that close personal relationship with the Lord Jesus that I should have. I always knew who he was. There's always a reverence there. Wasn't a bad kid, didn't really do anything wrong, but it just wasn't close and personal, like it should have been, like you hoped for. Excuse me. Graduated from high school in 1967 during the 1967 war. Paratroopers are liberating Jerusalem, and I didn't know anything. I remember a classmate asking me. He said, "What do you think about the war going on?" And I said, "Who's fighting?" And he says, "The Arabs and the Jews." And I said, "What are they fighting about?" And so that shows you how much I didn't know, didn't have a clue, what was going on. And so how gracious the Lord is to have mercy on me and eventually teach me what he wants me to learn, to teach me the right things. So it's off to college. I went to the University of Tulsa, just across the, 10 miles away, not very far. I was a business major, and so I did that. But during my senior year in high school, I'd gone to football games and dances and all this stuff with a girl from another high school, and her name's EX. So we go. So I go off to school, and EX is having trouble like teenagers do in their households and stuff and all that, and she doesn't know what to do. So somewhere along the way, we decided to get married in my freshman year of college. It just, you look back on your life, you see the top 10 dumbest things you've done, and you think getting married at 18 probably takes first, second, third, fourth. Probably takes at least 5 of those positions, My daughter was born my senior year of college. I kept going. Elizabeth born when I was 21. Jason 3.5 years later when I was 24. But one thing about me at that time, there would have been this quiet self-confidence, which was probably more pride, because it was, it's like I could do it. I can do all this stuff. I can get out there. I can, I was raised, it's like, okay, go get a wife, go get 2 kids, go get a 3-car house, 3-car garage, and, house, live the American dream. And I attacked all of it that way. And I wasn't afraid of work. I went to school full time, and my sophomore, junior, and senior years, I worked full time. I was a computer operator at night, so I did both. I was married, and so I thought I can handle it all. But I wasn't walking with the Lord. I was thinking I can do it all. And one of these days, he was going to show me that wasn't the case, and that it was wrong for me to be doing it that way. But as a young father, when I had Elizabeth and Jason both, I always loved being a father. Still do. We're still very close. I don't see them very often, but when we do, we get together, we have a good time, we have good laughs. But I love to get in the floor and play with the kids. By now I like to play with dolls, and so I would get out and play with dolls with Elizabeth, or push trucks with Jason, and or we'd color. They were always amazed how I could stay in between the lines when I was coloring. But I always enjoyed being a father. And it was about that time that I thought spiritually that I was responsible for them. Because I didn't know that it was biblical, but I felt responsible for them. I thought, how are these young kids going to learn unless I teach them, or someone else? And so what I do in all my wisdom, I walk them up to the closest Disciples of Christ Christian church, and they're still doing the same thing. They're still standing up and walking down and sitting down. And I didn't. This time it bothered me. I thought there's got to be more than this, because I grew up thinking, well, this is church, and I don't get anything out of it. I'm going, but I don't enjoy it. I don't understand it. And my parents about that time went to a non-denominational church, a Bible church. And so I went with them. We went one day to see what it was like, and all these people were laughing, smiling, talking, and you think, well, they're glad to be here, And so up to me, up to then, you think church was just rehearsals for funerals, because you didn't know anything else. And so then, you sit down, and then you have he says, oh, turn to Galatians or Ephesians or whatever. And then they started reading it. And I thought, wow, he's reading more than one verse, And I thought, what a unique idea to read the Bible. And I had two problems, right? First one is I didn't have a Bible. Second one is I didn't know where Galatians was or Ephesians or whatever he told us to turn to. So I remembered when I did get baptized, they gave me those little King James Bibles, and so I went and got that and took that with me the next week. I found where the index page was. Kept my finger on that most of the time. The index page told me where the books were. And that was my best friend for several months while you're scanning, while you're learning. But I finally began a walk with the Lord. I finally began learning. I had an appetite for the Word. I loved it. And I loved reading it. And I loved His Word. And just coming up and all that. But that's my mid-late 20s. But what happens there, sadly, that probably wasn't enough to save the marriage at that point. We had this pattern had developed where I would come home on Saturdays from working. EX would say she'd watch the kids all week, and then she wanted me to watch them, and so that was okay with me. I mean, the kids had fun. We'd go play Frogger or Donkey Kong or something. We had a good time. And but it was either she was with the kids or I was with the kids, and it wasn't the four of us. It wasn't a family, and so that was a bad pattern that was starting there. We scheduled. I knew there were problems. We talked about the problems. I'm sure I did work too much. I was climbing that corporate ladder as fast as I could go, and I thought that was one thing I was supposed to do. And I found out that that's wrong too. But planned a vacation one year, and so we were going to go to Kansas City. And up in Kansas City, they had a water park and a other park, whatever. And so the four of us were going to go. Well, the day before we left, EX said she didn't want to go, that she had things to think about and all that. And so the kids and I went. So we had a good time. The day I get back is the day that she asked me to go ahead and leave and get out of the house. And so for all that, I totally regretted it. It's not what God ever intended for divorce to be. And so even today, I'll confess those sins. Whatever I did, if I did work too much, if I paid too much attention to the kids, if I didn't pay enough attention to her, shame on me. But the real problem was probably because I wasn't the spiritual head of the household that I should have been. I was still growing in my own walk, and it just wasn't there right then. So when... But it was that first day when I got in my own apartment, and a good workaholic gets an apartment by work. So I was, but it was that first day when I shut that door. The apartment's empty, it's lonely, and that's when I'm on my knees. That's when I realized finally that everything that I'd done had been wrong, and I asked for forgiveness, asked for the Lord to show me His ways, teach me to walk in His paths totally. And from there, and I thought it was the bottom, and I thought, it can only go up from here. And, fat chance that being the bottom. The Lord still He was going to take me to the woodshed a couple more times. So, Jason had, little girls are perfect, and Elizabeth was always perfect. And Jason was a boy, and EX had trouble with Jason being a little rowdy, getting into things, breaking things, stuff like that. And I knew that, and that had always been there. So at first she said, well, Jason's going to stay with me. After 4 months, Jason missed me, and so he wanted to come and be with me. So 4 months later, we did that. The salary's a big part of it. The salary been going up and up and up, like I said. So that climbing that corporate ladder, I felt so humiliated at the divorce that I just, whatever I was making at that time, I took it and I divided it in half because I knew I was going to have to, I thought, well, I'll keep them in the house and I'll just go over here and live. And so I thought, well, next year I'll make more and more and more. Yeah, fat chance that happened too. But, so anyway, so I agreed to some exorbitant amount of alimony and child support. And then Jason came to live with me 4 months later. That's the first time we did go to court. I didn't even go to court the first time. I just signed the papers. And so I went just to make it legal that Jason came. So I was a single parent for 4 years. And that's hats off to all single parents because that's a tough job. And if they got more than one kid, that's yeah, my goodness. Because the biggest problem you face is you can't be in two places at once, you know. And so here I am with an oil and gas company in Tulsa, and you know, head of the information system. We're rocking and rolling, and that's a fun industry to be in. You know, you're punching holes in the ground. You know, and 8 out of 10 of them, there's nothing there. But sometimes, boy, when they do hit something, you know, the whole company gets excited and stuff. But they were coming to us to say, how much is this well costing? How much do we do this? And when they hit something, how many other wells, how much land do we have around there? So we were a very integral part of the company. So you'd be having a meeting like this, and then the phone would ring. And it's Jason. You know, Jason would say, well, can I go over to Billy's? And I'd say, Jason, good to hear. I want to hear about your day, you know, and all that. Let me finish this meeting, and I'll be right back with you, and I'll call you back, and we'll talk about it. And so I'd, you know, hang up, you know, and you just as fast as those little fingers would dial. You know, I can barely get the meeting restarted again, and he calls and says, well, can I? You know? And so, and of course, that wasn't Jason's fault. That was mine, because I had created that situation. And so, like I said, being a single parent definitely had more challenges because you just couldn't be there. I couldn't be there when I got home from school, and you would try. But the work and the career started to be affecting. So about a year and a half after, roughly after the divorce, well, then the oil and gas company, we were very profitable, very marketable, and we were of a subsidiary that sold us to somebody in California. So here's the classic takeover scenario. You know, I see they lay off my boss, you know, so he's gone. And pretty soon the tax manager's gone, the auditor's gone. You know, and I thought, well, all of my peers are gone. And once again, you think, well, those guys must have been incompetent or something, you know. I wasn't, that quiet pride was still there. And then they called me in. And they said, well, you haven't done anything wrong, but they said the new owners want new blood, new faces. And that rang in my ears for 3 years, new blood, new faces, you know. I thought that was a reason for them to let me go. And so let me go. It's hard times for oil and gas in Tulsa. Tulsa was small enough. I knew people. I knew what they were doing. I'm looking, because of the alimony situation too, I wanted an income up here, you know, and so I had expectations. So I thought I had to go to the big city to find a job. So that's when Jason and I moved from Tulsa to Dallas. And moving to Dallas is I went down there first to push code, you know, I was a programmer. And so I went down there to do that. But that's what caused the split in the family that exists today. Jason lives in Texas. Elizabeth lives in Oklahoma. My parents are still in Oklahoma and all that. So the family, you know, but right there, it's because I'm looking for a job is what caused that. And, you know, but as Jason and I are going down the highway, I'm walking pretty good with the Lord. I know it's going to be okay. Don't have a job, don't have a paycheck, you know, but I knew he was with me, and I knew I was going to come out of it. And so, you know, a couple of guys having fun. Jason's 11, 12, and I asked him if he wanted to drive the big rental truck going down the highway, and so he comes over and sits in my lap, and so that's the first time he ever drove a car, and so, you know, it's like, yeah, so we tried to have some fun, too, when we're doing other things, but I'm in Dallas 6-7 months. Dallas is big and flat, and you're driving everywhere, and just trying to keep up with everything again. The salary wasn't nearly where it needed to be. So, you know, you're taking out of the left pocket and putting in the right pocket, and, you know, you're doing stuff like that. So I thought I'd try to find another job. I'd been a temporary, I was doing contract work until then. So I went by then, in Dallas, I went to a personnel agency that was recommended, and I walked in, and I'm in my mid-30s, and when I walk into the personnel agency, well, there sits Kay, And so Kay is the receptionist, the office manager, and everything for this personnel agency that I went to go find a job. I needed a job. And so they turn around and they're talking to me. And they said, well, have you ever thought about doing this? And I said, oh, gosh, no, I don't like headhunters, I mean, who wants to do that for a living? But then they said, oh, you can make such and such money. And so you think, well, maybe I'll try that. So the people I went to go see turned around and hired me. Or I wanted them to find me a job, and they gave me a job. But that was a divine appointment there. Because then a year later from that, Kay and I were married. And so that, for Kay, she'd been married before, but it hadn't lasted but a year or two. And so she had gone 14 years or so, just by herself. And she didn't think it would ever happen again, see. And I was just hustling. I was dancing as fast as I could, just trying to keep up. Had never really thought about it. But the Lord turns around and brings back, and things happen again. And it happened for me in my mid-30s, and it can certainly happen for any and each and every one of you, too. So that things start, prior to that also, while Jason and I were down there, we were walking with the Lord pretty good, because Jason and I had him in youth groups. We were studying, we're learning all this time. We're still learning. And Kay hadn't been to church in a long time. And so finally, here, the Lord's given me a second chance to be the spiritual head of a household. And so she starts learning, and so I start teaching her some, and teaching Jason at the same time. And so all that worked out pretty good. We ended up, we were living in Dallas, but Kay was a country girl. She always wanted to be in the country. I told her I'd make that dream come true. We bought some land in Kaufman, Texas, about 35 miles east of there. And we paid for the land first before we moved out there. We had some horses, and they lived there longer than we did. And then we didn't move out there until 91, or 1990. So we finally is when we moved out there. My daughter graduated in 1989. That definitely helped financially a heck of a lot, because I was never going to ignore a payment or an obligation or anything. And that's especially when we moved to Texas. I knew that my relationship with Elizabeth would be the thing that hurt the most, because I love my daughter, but if you're 300 miles away, you're 300 miles away. You miss functions, you miss events, you just miss things. So we're still close today. I mean, we pick up the phone and call. Elizabeth's had all the grandkids are by Elizabeth. Jason hadn't had any, or Jody hadn't. But yeah, like I say, both of my kids are much stronger believers than I was, because I was able to preach at them and say, don't do what I did. It was real easy to say, look, and open the Bible and let's read it, let's understand it. So, but it's also in my mid-80s, or in the mid-80s there, where Kay and we started. You open the book and you read the Bible, and it's all about Jerusalem. It's all about the Jews, and you start studying your Jewish roots. And Zola Levitt had a lot to do with that. He had a Dallas ministry, and he taught it. He taught the Jewish roots, and I would hear it, and someday you would hear, well, gosh, you can actually go there, and people really go there. You still go there and stuff, and so that it put a desire in my heart to come to Israel someday, But finances and stuff, you just couldn't make the trip right now. But it was good to learn, and so we did like that. The first trip to Israel was in 1993. The kids are grown, out of the house, gone. I came with Zola Levitt, and it was your classic tour. And of course, I just immediately fell in love with the land. And that love is still there. This is his land. You just like being here. You just like doing anything that you can do to be here. And even the traditional, when you go to the traditional touristy thing where you get baptized, it's like, yeah, I did that too, because I thought, okay, I'm 43 years old. I'm a lot smarter than I was when I was 12. And so this baptism, I thought, okay, now I know what I'm doing. And so I was pleased to do that. And so we came back again in 94. Another tour where you sort of see, you see different things and all that, but after a while then you think, well, why do you come back on tours? Let's go somewhere else where the tour buses don't go. And I was paying attention to, I wanted to know people in the land. and I heard Zola Levitt mention Christian Friends of Israel and some others and all that. It was about then that Ray and Sharon came to Dallas. They put on a conference at Christ for the Nations, and Lance Lambert came to speak, and David Dolan. And I remember going to that conference, and I started being a supporter of CFI at that time. Joyce had just joined somewhere in there, and she gave us a wall of prayer assignment. And so I remember Kay and I came in 1996 to the Shavuot conference, and because I said I want to go see my little town I pray for. And so we rented a car and we drove up to Shlomi, and so I did see it. But we were starting to get involved because I asked Joyce at the time, is there any other places we can take pictures of or not? And she says, she send you a map. Yeah, here, Betset and Matsuva and everywhere else. And so we were taking photos there too. So that was a good trip. Came back in 1997 to the Shavuot conference also. I had gone when Ehud Olmert was mayor, and he knocked through the wall down at the, and the Arabs get all upset like they always do. They moved the troops. Syria moved the troops up to the border, and then the Golan. And it looked like it was war, and I thought, well, let's go take some pictures of the Golan. and I actually hired a guide. I bought a book that some guy wrote a real nice book, and in the back of it said you could hire him, and so I hired him for 2 days, and we drove the Golan, and so he was impressed back then. That Christians cared that much. But I did, so we did come to the 97 conference also. In 1998, Ray and Sharon came to Colorado, the Resurrection Fellowship, and it's a conference, and Ebenezer was there, Gustav Scheller was there, and Kay and I flew up there to meet with them and to attend the conference. But that's when we also decided that I just wanted to keep. I'm taking little steps here. I want to take a bigger step. And so we came. That's when we had dinner one night, and we decided that we would try to come. And so we came in 98 for 6 months. And so that's what brought me to Israel the first time as a volunteer. And Kay was Ray's secretary for a couple of 3 months. She stayed 90 days, and then she went back. I quit my job. But she got a 90-day leave of absence. She was afraid to do that. But let's give some glory and honor to the Lord, because I had more advice not to go to Israel and quit your job and all that from my parents. My dad has his pastor write me. Everybody tell me what an idiot you are. And so, but it's a nice leap. It was a good leap of faith. And they always said, well, wait and do that when you get to retirement. And I said, what if something happens between now and retirement? And sure enough, that proved true. But the Lord, for 6 months I came, and I'd been with a company, Lincoln Property, in Dallas, and I was head of their information systems at the time, and I had a real strong number 2 candidate, and I had pulled him aside and asked him. I said, I'm getting ready to quit. You want my job? And so he still got it today, but I was because I didn't want to hurt him or anything like that. And but Lincoln Property, after I spent my 6 months here, well, they hired me back as a contractor because I had a lot of knowledge with what they were doing and stuff, and that I contracted with them for another year at more money than I left, where the Lord turns around and blesses that leap of faith, and then I stayed with them for another 3 or 4 years up until 2003, something like that. But yeah, the Lord he rewarded being able to just pick up and go and to trust Him. And the thing that pulled me back at the time, I remember Ray asking when I was headed back, was the house and the farm and all that, because Jason had been watching it for a while, and he's 24/5. He gets tired of watching it after a while. So and so yeah, the obligation of the house came back, which made you realize that the idea that when the Lord Jesus said, "Sell all you have and come follow me," it's like, well, you got to come with no strings attached, because something pulls back. So that does that. But in 2001, because Gustav in 1998 had come up to me. We were eating breakfast in the hotel, and he came up and he was talking to Kay and I. And Gustav patted me on the back. He just said, "We need strong backs in Odessa," and I never forgot that. And of course, he got shortly in '98. He got cancer, and he lost his arm, and then he was gone. But So I always wanted to, I thought, boy, that would be nice to see the Jews come home. And so it was 2001 in September when I went 1 week to Odessa and just carried suitcases. And, they would tell you that what you did there was, they'd tell you, well, this such and such train is pulling in, and go to car 35, and there'll be some Jews standing there with with their suitcases. And that's just exactly what it was. And it was always rush, 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 hurry, hurry, because they were afraid that they were going to get stopped and have to show their papers, and something would interrupt it and all that. And but we did that, and that was nice. And one day there, when we did that, there was a couple that was leaving, a young family that was leaving, and they hadn't told their neighbors or anything that they were leaving. And so their neighbors, we were told it was very quiet. They were going to do it at lunchtime when they didn't think anybody was there. And so they said, well, get in, get the bags, get out. And what Ebenezer had a little place for them to stay until the ship came in. You know, the ship would come in on Saturday or something like that. So then we have, we go do that. We load this family up, loaded it real quick, and then we drove to another part of Odessa, and we met an elderly lady, or the mother, the grandmother that couldn't go, and so you talk about the tears. She's hugging her daughter and her grandkids because she knows she's never going to see them again, because we're leaving her in Odessa, but she knows what they're doing, and so we bring that there. But the day we loaded the ship, I've never seen, you have 5 bus loads of stuff pull up. I mean, just all kinds of luggage to do. But it was hard work, but it was fun, and you knew you're helping fulfill prophecy, at that point. The ship's loaded, and you're down on the dock, and you're looking up, and they're waving at you from up there because you're helping them go home. And you're singing any song you can think of, But it was a good time. But I know that you all got to ride the ship too, and so that's how special that must have been to be able to ride with them, to sail with them all the way through. But then, and I flew that was just 1 week, but I flew that Sunday night from Odessa to Tel Aviv. Rented a car the next day, Monday, and drove to Jerusalem, and of course that's Tuesday, 9/11. So on 9/11, I'm in Jerusalem. And you all were traveling, I think. Yeah. And so I remember Rod Valentine was a director, and at the time I remember going to CFI and praying for the nation. Initially, I had, back when the internet was kind of coming up, I had told Kay, I said, well, they had this internet picture on a wall, and I said, well, I'll go down there at 6 o'clock and you see if you see me. This was before it happened. And so anyway, I had plans to go down there anyway. So yeah, I'm down at the wall praying for the nation, which deserves judgment. But yeah, Lord have mercy, and spare them. So I was here in 2001. Then in 2002, I came back for the Shavuot, the Tabernacles tour, the conference. Came with Gloria Putnam and a couple of friends, and so that was actually my last time to be in Israel until last October, and so. Like I say, ever since I first set foot in the land, I just fell in love with it, and it's just such a privilege to be here. So I really like that. But now, let's see. I got a little time. We'll have a couple of stories about Kay, because we did have fun. We did enjoy each other. Early in the marriage, I took her to an OU Texas football game, and Lori's left the room, but only Lori could appreciate that. You have a college rivalry. And Oklahoma never wants to lose to Texas, and Texas doesn't want to lose to Oklahoma, like Ohio State and Michigan play. And she had never been. And they meet in Dallas. You have the University of Texas is 250 miles south in Austin, and the University of Oklahoma is 250 miles north, and they meet in the middle in Dallas. And the stadium seats 80,000 people. And so 40,000 people get Oklahoma tickets, and 40,000 people get Texas tickets. And so I just bought scalpers tickets, anything I could get. And we were in the end zone, and of course Kay goes out and buys me a red sweatshirt to show she's from Oklahoma, and of course here she is in her orange, University of Texas orange. She's got little Longhorn earrings on. She's got a Longhorn, big old Longhorn sunglasses, and she's got her pom-pom, and so she's going to root those Longhorns home, and so sure enough, my tickets were in the end zone, in the Oklahoma end zone. So there's just thousands of people sitting in red, dressed in red, except for Kay. And so, and it was a classic OU Texas game. So they're going up and down the field, and and so either thousands of them are standing up in red cheering, or here's Kay. When Texas do it, and somehow she's hitting her husband with that pom pom, and letting her know, when she were having trouble. But she, it was a classic game, and at the very end of it, they won. And of course, she was so proud, and I never heard the end of that game, but it was fun. I had told a story also when, and I told this one when she was laid to rest. I was on a business trip one night, came home in a bad thunderstorm, and we were in Kaufman at the time, and so I pull up in the garage, and she's out there giving something a bath. I couldn't see what it was. Something was just covered in suds. This little old dog looks up at me, and so I said, "Well, that's a cute dog." I said, "Whose dog is that?" And she says, "Well, I was driving home, and it was raining, and the dog was by the side of the road. It took me 30 minutes to get it. I got wet, and she said, finally came to me, got in the back seat." And I said, "Well, that's a cute story," but I said, "You didn't answer the question." I said, "Whose dog is that?" I knew whose dog it was. And so, because when we got married, she had a little Sheltie called Spit. And so we had Spit and this stray dog. So about 2 or 3 weeks later, I come home again. I shouldn't go on business trips. So here I come home again, and Spit and the little stray dog are getting to know each other, and her mom's there, and so her mom says, "Do you know what they're doing out there?" And I said, "I think so. I think I remember biology," and so, but sure enough, we had 8 puppies out of there. Oh gosh, and oh man, makes my neck hurt now. And but that was in November, and those little puppies were the cutest things right at Christmas time. And she always said that was the best Christmas she ever had. She couldn't figure out which puppy to hold next. That doesn't say much for the husband, but she did love the puppies. So, like I said, we did have a nice place in Kaufman. She loved animals. We had horses, we had donkeys, we had 8 dogs. She had a couple of chickens, a goose. She would go pick up a chicken and ask me if I want to pet it. And I said, "Well, who in their right mind would want to pet a chicken?" And the goose didn't like me at all. So sometimes you have to remind the goose that God gave man dominion over animals. And so I'm like, okay, let's get this straight here. So we'll do that. But we did have a good time. Kay retired. She worked 35 years at that little placement agency. I only lasted 3, and I was out of there and went back to doing technical work. And so that would have been 2003. And the first thing she did, her mother was 87 at the time, and so her mother was starting to lose her eyesight. And so we had a 2-car garage, and so we converted that garage to a 1-bedroom apartment for her mom. And we added another bathroom and another window unit and stuff and all that. And so Kay's mom came to live with us for 3 years. And so Kay, she headed up all that. And she kept saying that she didn't like being a freeloader. And I said, "Oh, you don't have to go to work. You don't have to be a freeloader." And she said the last thing she wanted to do was sit behind a desk again. And so one of the ladies at work was a school teacher, had a little baby. And so Kay never had any children. And so Kay got to take care of a little baby boy for 9 months, and and everything that goes with that. So the Lord blessed her with that. So she got to feed him and change his diapers and all that, and watch little boys make fountains and stuff and all. And so it's like So she that was good. And after that second year, she another lady at church opened a bookstore with a coffee shop and stuff and all that. And so she didn't work full time, so she just worked 2 or 3 days up there. But finally, one day in 2005, she kept complaining, that she had fluid in her stomach. And anyway, we find out that's ovarian cancer. I'm sorry. So with the who knows anything about ovarian cancer? if you get on the internet, you can't find anything good. The first doctor she went to, Kay immediately went to the bottom line and said, how much time do I have? And with ovarian cancer, they have, there's something called CA125. You draw blood, and all women have CA125. And it's supposed to be under 30, whatever that is. And Kay's was 9,000. So, Kay said she always saw it in her eyes that she wouldn't make it, in the doctor's eyes. And the doctor told her she'd have about 18 months. And she hit that right on the head. We had 3 chemo treatments before. And she had a major surgery. The hysterectomy, they take out as much cancer as they can. We had 4 more cancer treatments that were the same. They had to stop those. This is in April 2006. They had to stop those because, Kay, how can anything go good when you're dumping poison in your body? It starts killing everything. It kills cancer, but it kills everything else. And one of Kay's biggest problems, her hands would go numb and her feet. And at first that just lasted a few hours the first time, and then as it went along, it lasted longer and longer, to where it almost didn't go away after the 7th treatment. And so they said, well, we don't want to make you cripple, so we're going to stop this poison and we're going to give you another poison. And they almost left that up to us to figure out which one that would be. I mean, they don't have they don't know what to do next. They said you'll be going into second-line treatment is what they called it. And of course, second-line treatment is a way of saying there's no remission. And Kay asked again how long she had. And she told her 1 year, and that would be true. But that's May 2006. In July 2006, and I got to go back and give glory to God. In the summer 2005, because God knows the end from the beginning. How fascinating that is. In the summer of 2005, Kay's little sister moves from New Jersey after being up there with her family for 29 years in New Jersey. And they moved back and moved 4 miles away. And I told Kay at the time, before we knew she was sick, I thought, well, I think she's coming back to help with your mom. Because all of that burden had been pretty much on Kay. But they were also, every time Kay and Gail would talk together, Kay would always end the conversation, when you moving back to Texas, she would always ask her that. But sure enough, she moves back in July 2005, 3 months before Kay's diagnosed. The other thing that happened, the Battalion of Deborah had a conference on Israel, and in Fort Worth, Gloria Putnam was setting up a CFI table, and she asked if Kay and I wanted to sit with us, and she also said, and there's going to be another couple there, Merlin and Margaret Hampton, who I didn't know. And she said, we'll tag team watch the CFI table during the conference, which we did. And of course, Merlin and Margaret and Kay and I, we all got along real well. And because it's fun. It's fun working for the Lord. But Margaret Hampton is a trained nurse. And so the days would come when we needed her. So now back to 2006. Kay, it's May 2006. Kay knows she's got a year left. In July, I said one morning, I said to my mother-in-law, I just said, I'll see you this evening, And I usually spoke to her. She was up early, and I'd speak to her as we go out. and and everything seemed to be okay. And Kay called me a couple hours later and said her mom was having heart trouble, was having chest pains, and she had been diagnosed earlier. Her mother, this is her mother, that with chest pains, and they want to do open heart surgery. She's 90 years old. I mean, who does open heart surgery at 90? And so none of the kids really got along with that. But they did give us, at the time, they gave us some nitroglycerin tablets. And so Kay gave her one of those nitroglycerin tablets. She called me, and thank you very much. This was worked out ahead of time. And so I'm at work. I worked 50 miles away from where I live. And then Kay called me back a couple hours later, and her mom's not breathing on the floor. Kay's trying to give her mouth-to-mouth resuscitation a day after she had chemo. And so I start heading to the house as fast as I can, and knowing I can't get there very soon. I get to the hospital. By the time the paramedics came to our house and all this and that, I get to the hospital right at the same time they say that her mom's gone. And so her mom was gone with a massive heart attack. And so she didn't have to... I don't know if her mother ever really understood what Kay was suffering through too or not. But then, of all things, about 60 days later, we get home. I got home from work just as the phone rang, and it was our sister-in-law. Kay's little brother was 48 years old. She came, and sister-in-law came home and found him laying there. And so now we're driving back through Dallas, 70, 80 miles an hour, in big traffic. And Kay said this. She just said, "Oh, dude, this is almost too much." And all you can do is cry out to the Lord. And we get to the hospital, and her little brother's gone. So Kay saw her mom and her little brother both pass away in 60 days. Her mother was raised in central Texas, a little town called Henley, about 40 miles west of Austin. Kay was born in Austin. Most of the kids were born in Austin. So there's kind of a private family-type cemetery down there for everybody that's born there. So we make this drive to Austin in July for her mom. Then we make it again in September for her little brother. And then we'd make it again 6 months in April. As we approach December, I'll need all of it. Thank you. In December 2006, the cancer was all over her intestine. Her intestine. She couldn't eat anything. And Baylor Hospital, which was supposed to be the best. They were all MD Anderson grads out of Houston, which is supposed to be the cancer place in Houston, or in America. They said it's not worth it. They didn't want to do surgery. They didn't want to do anything else. Case didn't want to keep fighting. So we asked for a second opinion. And so we went to UT Southwestern. They said they would operate. At this point, if you open, and I didn't know these things till they tell you, if they open you back up, the cancer spreads quicker. But she didn't like the idea of starving to death. So we prayed through that surgery. He got in, he grabbed part of the intestine, he said, and he just went around the cancer. And so that started flowing again. But we went from where the chemotherapy for over a year had caused her severe constipation. Boy, we went total opposite way. And that was tough. It was tough on her. She could still get up for a while. She didn't eat a lot after that anyway. One day I saw her and she looked scared. And I asked her what was she scared of. And she said not dying at home. so I told her I wouldn't let that happen. So the hospital's going to train us in home health care, something we don't know anything about. One of the first things we had to do was we had to hydrate her, just like being in a hospital, how you have a drip and an IV drip, they call them, and stuff. We had these 3-liter bags of saline that we would put on there, and one had potassium and one didn't, and so one day you use one, the next day you use the other. But they were 6-hour drips, and but we had, not drips, but we had, it was a little battery power pack. Kay had a med port in her shoulder, and the med port underneath, it was directly attached to an artery, and this little thing was hanging out, and so I could figure out how to screw that in there. So I would hook that up, and that gave her enough fluids to keep her going, and stuff like that. And so that was one thing we had to do daily. Because the cancer was growing, we weren't taking chemo anymore. She couldn't go in. And so that fluid that originally started was coming back in her abdomen. And so that was painful, and that had to be drained. So she had a tube coming out of her stomach. And of course that was a very sensitive area, sensitive place. And but they showed us what we had to do. And so it's a sterile environment, what you had to do. And so the first thing you do, you put on these doctor-type gloves. Well, in the hospital, they're showing me what to do. And I have trouble, step one, getting the gloves on. And they go get me they go get me a bigger size glove. So I got the bigger size glove, and I was able to do it. But they said that doesn't come with the standard package. So because they told us who to call, and so we would have people. These kits would be shipped by FedEx straight to our door. So I looked at the package. The hospital gave me about 3 packages. I look at the package and I see here's a website. And so I get on the website and I email somebody and say I need to buy a couple of boxes of these gloves, size whatever it was, 8.5 or something. And I get an email back, and then this is when you know the Lord's with you, even if it's bad times. I get an email back. And it says, he can't sell to individuals. He can only, they sell to hospitals and this and that, da-da-da-da. But then he says, however, I can send you 2 boxes of samples. And he says, it's FedEx, be there tomorrow morning, So praise God, So I email him back, and I say, what a gift from the Lord, And I said that. And so he emailed me back and said, I'm glad you recognized it was from the Lord Jesus. Because he says, my mother's had breast cancer, and he says my boss's wife has had ovarian cancer, and so here, just by emailing that, I at least had the gloves that I needed to get started, and so it's like what a blessing. So he's with us, but you'd put these gloves on, and then you had to take the tape off, and you had to clamp both sides. We had this bottle, it was a vacuum packed bottle, and you had to clamp it, and you would do all this, and you put some sort of killer, because it was, her stomach, it was open, right around it. And once you did all that, you'd release the clamps, and then you flip this little switch on the vacuum packed bottle, and that fluid would just start coming out of her belly. And she would have, they told us not to take more than 1 liter a day, but she would have 1 liter of that stuff on there. And so that took a while to do. We would do that, and Gail, Kay's little sister, was much better at it than I was, because she was a seamstress and everything, and so it was a lot easier if there were 2 of us, and because one would stay sterile and then the other one could do a lot of the other things. But there were days I had to do that by myself, and of course Kay would usually say, "Where's Gail?" And I said, "Oh, she'll be here soon, but we'll get started." And at one time I said, "Uh-oh," and that really got her nervous, But you would do all that, and then you'd wrap it up, and then you had to make sure it was very secure again before you could do anything. In January and February, a lot of that fluid had got over in her lungs, and so we do her abdomen. Then we have to go around the other side and repeat the procedure and do it on her lungs. And eventually we caught up with the lungs, and so the lungs we just had to do about once every 3 days or 4 days. There was just very little there, but we had this. It was almost an all-day thing to take care of her. She ended up with a blood clot in her leg in the hospital, and Margaret was with her at the time that happened. I spent every night I could with her at the hospital, and either about every 5 or 6 nights, 4 or 5 nights, either Gail would relieve me or Margaret would come spend the night at the hospital also. And so I could go home and get some clean clothes and stuff too. And plus check the mailbox because CFI America was going on, and so I was doing multiple things. But and then so with the blood clot, we had to give her a physical shot in her stomach there, heparin, I believe, or something like that, twice a day. And I didn't like those. I didn't like those at all because that was a real needle that you really had to stick in. So I prayed over all those needles, and then after a while, her little tummy looked like a pincushion, But then through her med port, we would give her the medicine, and so the first one you had saline that you would give, and then a medicine A, whatever it was, and then saline, medicine B, and all this. We could have as many as 12 to 14 syringes lined up there that we just gave all at once, And of course, Kay wanted the last one because it was something for nausea, but it made her sleepy, and she just wanted to go to sleep. She just wanted to sleep, and so we would do that, make sure it was the last one, and then she would go to sleep. But when the time came when she couldn't get out of bed to go to the bathroom, we set a little porta potty there, and I had to lift her out of bed, which is okay, but I would lift her out. Then you had to set her up and swing her legs at the same time. And then I'd have to stand her up and then sit down real quick. All the time I'm doing that, she's saying, "Hurry, dude." And so she was, I was going as fast as I could. My sister told me once that I always counted every time I was talking to her, and I didn't notice that. But I'd always say, "Okay, I'm going to move you on 3. 1, 2, 3, here we go." And then I'd say, "We're going to stand up on 3," and I'd go 1, 2, 3. And then sometimes I'd say uno, dos, tres, so she'd know I was bilingual, So, and but I always told her that. But I would set her down on the little porta potty thing, and that was usually a 15, 20-minute type situation. She would either just lay her head against my hip there, or I would go get another chair and I would face them each other, and then she just kind of fell forward and she would put her head right here. And that's not the way the romance novels put it. I mean, the way Hollywood writes love. But I liked that. That was the only time I could hold her. And we would do that. We'd reverse the procedure. Put her back in the middle of the bed. We'd sit down, and about 30 minutes later, we'd do it again. And then we had to do it again and again. And that last weekend was all night long. And I know she was tired. I know she was very, very tired. And I heard a lady from church say that her prayer was that for Kay, for God to go ahead and take Kay. And I sort of asked her to repeat that because I hadn't thought of that. I hadn't thought about how could I say that. And but finally, you talk about short prayers. That's about as short as I could get. I just said, "Father, if it's your will to take her now, then it's okay." And it's like he was waiting for me to pray his will because it started happening so fast. I went to church the next day. I told the pastor, we had a small church. It was too small for a funeral. And I told him it would be okay if we go over to another church in Kaufman where we used to go, and everybody used to go somewhere. And I called the elders over at the other church for Kay's mom's service. She had got 4 of my guys at prayer breakfast that sang some songs. I called a couple of the buddies and asked them to sing these songs in this order. And Monday I went to the funeral home, which I hadn't done Tuesday afternoon, we were under hospice care. We'd only been under it 3 weeks, and they really didn't do anything except they gave her they came out and gave her a sponge bath. So at the end of the sponge bath, the little girl said she was not responsive, is what she said. But Kay, I went in there and Kay was she was breathing, and yet I know now that was a coma, but I just thought she was relaxed and sleeping. After a few hours, you knew it wasn't. It's Tuesday afternoon, and Kay had 2 friends come up. 2 of her childhood friends from Austin came up to spend the night with us, and they were going to set up with her and try to let me get some sleep, and so I did get some sleep, and was up about 6:15 and just kind of laying there, and it was about 6:30. Then she said she's not breathing, and she wasn't, and I dropped to my knees and thanked the Lord. Because she went so peacefully. And the hospice had given us all this horrible medicine to do things about, certain things happen. And we didn't have to do any of that. The Lord just took her home. So 3 days later, on Saturday, we make that 3rd trip down to Austin, which it's a 4-hour drive. So we had to you have to schedule the service around it. So the service we had about 10 in the morning, and then we let Kay go on, and I had a lot of former co-workers that I hadn't seen in years show up. The day we went down there, it was April in Texas, and she went home on April 4th, and the bluebonnets were out. And so you're driving down the Texas roads, and bluebonnets are pretty. But I'll be doggone if it doesn't start snowing. And it hadn't snowed in Texas in April in 80 years. And so my pastor very graciously made the trip. And he said, snow and bluebonnets. In his prayer, he just says, snow and bluebonnets, Lord, only in Texas. And he said, only you can do that. But one of our friends that volunteered in 98, Carol McCarthy, when I talked to her, she just said, the verse came to her mind immediately. She just said in Isaiah, right, though your sins be as scarlet, I will make them whiter than snow. So what a day it was. A week after, just 1 week after she's gone home, my neighbors that own the land next to me called, and I knew what they wanted immediately. They wanted to buy the house if I was going to put it on the market. And I hadn't even got that far to thinking about it, but I thought, my goodness, what's the Lord doing here? He's handing me a buyer, and so he must want me to come to Israel pretty quick. And so all that happened, and we took care of that, sold the house. It took 3 weeks to sell everything we had. Kay had a lot of stuff, and she had a lot of stuff, and a lot of it didn't sell, but that's where people like Merlin and Margaret. Merlin cut my grass more than once, and Margaret and Gail deserve so much credit. And people, just for organizing things and garage sales. My little old church, every Sunday I'd go to church. Here's something to take home for dinner. So everybody participated there. Like Sharon mentioned, Kay talked about me coming to Jerusalem. She knew that's where my heart was. She knew that's where I wanted to be. I thought we would go together, but that wasn't the Lord's will. I remember Ray calling me the morning she went home, and I thank you for that call. I talked to you all for an hour or so in May, and it was moving so fast that we thought, well, we better slow it down a little bit. And so I rented a place for 4 months, and I came here in October. And I'm glad to be here. I'm glad to be serving the Lord. I look to see what He wants to do next with my life. I try to stay attentive. I know I shared this with someone that, in Ephesians 5, it says, husbands, love your wives like Christ loved the church. And then it says, like Christ loved the church, that he gave himself for it, to perfect it and make him a perfect bride for himself. And so, husbands, love your wives it's a command. It's not a condition. It doesn't say, love your wives if they make real good spicy Texas chili, But that does help. That helps a lot. And but it says, husband, love your wives. And then look at the standard. Look at as Christ loved the church. We've already talked about his love for us, how he came and died for us, and we just can't imagine that. But how he came and died and to perfect us, to refine us, to bring us through the trials, so that he can present us as a spotless bride. And so we owe him everything. But it's a privilege to be here. So now, prior to coming up here, I was down in accounting working, and then I walked up the stairs, and so now we've come full circle. So now you've heard it all. Thank you for listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Cary. That was very special and brought back some real memories of Kay to us as well. That was been to your place twice, I think. It's an experience to visit Kay and Cary's place. I'll never forget the first time we were there, especially all the animals. It's quite a ranch that you guys had. Thanks for being transparent. Appreciate that. Sharing, and also the ending as far as our responsibility as husbands. We need to be reminded of that more often than not. Praise God. Anyway, there's a saying that goes, confidence comes from knowing God hears our prayers and intervenes. And certainly you shared that today, how God heard your prayers and intervened with Kay, and bless the Lord for that. Amen. But Sharon and I and the XCOM feel the Lord has heard our prayers as well and has intervened. And we have something to share today that I'm going to ask Lori to come and share. Okay. Please come, Lori.
Before I get started, Cary, can I ask a question? Did you keep all 8 of the dogs? Oh, okay. I was going to say. Okay. No, but I mean, like when Kay was kept all 8 of them. Wow, amazing. My dad would be proud. All right, I want to start with a scripture that came to mind when I was asked to share what's happening. It says, "Unless the Lord builds the house, they labor in vain who build it." We know this verse, but. Just want to read it again. "Unless the Lord builds the house, they labor in vain who build it." And then it says in verse 2, "It is vain for you to rise up early, to retire late, to eat the bread of painful labors, for he gives to his beloved even in his sleep." This is a verse that I think is going to be very special to someone here. I just want to back up a little bit and tell you that 4 years ago, I came to CFI without really having any idea what I was getting into with ministry. I was going from a secular background, coming from a secular background to a ministry. And I have been permitted, under the leadership of the executive committee that has been here for the last 4 years, to really develop in what is my passion and to develop what God has given me. And my passion really has been people and serving where the Lord wants me. And as you all know, it's time now for that to end, my season here to end, and it's time for me to pass on the mantle that I was given to someone else. And I just want to share with you personally so you get what I'm saying. And I'm so glad this is a closed meeting today. In other words, you don't have a guest speaker, and we're family. I can be very real with you and just share some things personally so you understand kind of how close this is to my heart. When I was put into the position of, first of all, HR coordinator, but specifically then when I was given the next level of authority as the operations manager, I remember very clearly how that happened. And you may or may not remember it, but it meant the world to me, because what it meant was that the authority that God gave to the ministry here was actually passing that on to me, and in my flesh didn't deserve it. I look at myself and what I was, and then what God actually took and made. That is not me. It's not me, and it's what God can do. And so for that reason, I'm excited to pass this on and to do it in the right way, and to do it with an understanding of what it means to give a mantle of authority to someone else, and what God, more importantly, what God is going to do with that in spite of our own weaknesses. And you all have your own experiences that you could share. But the executive committee has gathered together, has met to talk about what they're going to do about my position when I'm gone. And Stacy has graciously agreed to take on this position. And in my conversations with Stacy, it has happened quite quickly in many ways. But in my conversations with Stacy, the thing that really came through was that Stacy does have, at the very core, Stacy has a desire to serve the Lord. And if you don't have that, you don't have anything. And if you have that, you have everything, because it is God that builds the house. And so Stacy has graciously accepted the challenges that are going to come with this position. And with that, I know when we were talking even just a little bit earlier, literally an hour or two ago, she shared with me that really what she wants to do is to make it easier for the volunteers. We're all here serving the Lord first, but we're serving others. Why are we here? We're here to serve the Jewish people, and we all do that in different ways, but we give and we give and we give and we give. And the Lord allows us to do that, but there are times, because we're human, when we're just tired and we need to be given to as well. And I know that is Stacy's heart, to come alongside and to support internally those of us that are here as a staff, to come alongside and to support in whatever that means. So along with that, I just want to, there's a couple things that are on my heart to share, because I've been in this position. I know what the challenges are. I know what the joys are. And I just want to say, Stacy is not going to be me. The Lord is going to show different things to Stacy than he showed to me. Stacy and I have different strengths. Stacy and I have different weaknesses. And I just want to encourage all of you as a staff to do for her what you did for me. Okay? There's a great many of you that are older than I am, way wiser than I am. I haven't been through something like Cary just shared, honestly. And I think about, I know some of your stories, and yet you came along, you accepted that God had put me in the position that I was in, and you supported me in that, and you really lifted my hands. And I just ask that you do the very same thing for Stacy, because she's going to need that. She's going to need your support. She's going to need your love. She's going to need, your support. And there's something else. Again, I'm glad this is a closed meeting, because you've heard the phrase, there's an elephant in the room. I want to just put that elephant in the room right out on the table. One of the things that is going to make this challenging is the fact that Stacy is family. Okay? So with me, when there were situations that came up, and you guys came to me and wanted to know how to handle something, you knew I wasn't married to one of the directors and the daughter of two of the other directors. Okay, so let's just lay it right out there on the table. That's what it is. I wasn't in a position to be chatting with them on the weekends, be living with them, all of these kinds of things. What can I tell you about that? I can tell you that there have been long discussions with the executive committee, each of the directors. I've spoken to Stacy personally, and Stacy gets it. She understands the responsibility that comes with that, and the challenge that she's going to have that I never had with that. And all I can say to you is that Stacy, without a doubt, I believe that Stacy will prove to be trustworthy. Now, we all know that you don't just trust someone. That's not the way that trust works. Trust is earned. And Stacy will definitely prove herself. I have every confidence in that. I'm just asking that we all